Hi, everyone. We're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I am Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
You are incredibly welcome to whatever space you're in that you're hearing us about. We are both social scientists with PhDs who are really interested in helping folks live more cohesively together. And one of the ways that we accomplish that is through conversations around culture, both popped and lived. Because honestly, that is entirely how we get cohesive or not cohesive. Moving on. Through this popular and lived culture analysis, engagement, and commentary, we spend a lot of time on our YouTube channel and on our podcast feed talking about popular culture, everything from the systemic racism showing up in Bridgerton to exactly what religion looks like in The Handmaid's Tale to our feelings about Tyler Perry's Lifetime Achievement Humanitarian Award at the 2020 Oscars. We try to investigate everything with empathetic and curious lenses, and that is why we are here today.
This video is a part of our Colonizers World Tour. If you've been with us for chapters 1 and 2, we're up to chapter 3, in which we're looking at just straight up colonies, y'all, for the rest of the year. First 2 chapters were a little wishy-washy. Now we're like colonization. And for chapter 3, we are looking at colonies in the Pacific Island, Australasia, Oceania,
yeah,
continent area of the world. We'll be looking at today, Indonesia. Then we'll be looking at Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and Guam. But our Colonizers World Tour, excuse me as the allergies take my voice. Our Colonizers World Tour series is part of this idea of looking at different cultures and understanding the broad humanity with this lens of empathy and curiosity. And so we look at the history of these places and how colonization has shaped that history and who they are now in the world. And so this is our Indonesia 101 video. Before we get into some demographic facts, Dr. Kristen, what did you know about Indonesia before we started doing our research?
I knew it was a lot of islands. I did know it was an archipelago because I love the word archipelago.
It's a great word.
And my training at Truett Seminary taught me that it is the largest population-wise Muslim country on the planet. And I spent a good chunk of time in my class on Islam with the incredible and incomparable Dr. Michael Wainstrup, talking about Indonesia and specifically how Islam and Christianity both work within the archipelago. So I knew on that front, like a lot. And then other than that, so it felt like I had a lot of knowledge, but then as we dug in, there was so many things I didn't know. What about you? What do you come? Oh, and I saw the movie Eat, Pray, Love. Bali is part of Indonesia.
Yeah.
So I saw that and I would like to go to Bali. End of knowledge. Yourself?
Significantly less, as is often the case on our Colonizers World Tour. Although in fairness, I did learn from our time in Saudi Arabia that Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world and has the highest proportion of allotments to the Hajj in Mecca. The pilgrimage in Mecca, the Saudi government gives out so many slots per year, and they give the most to their friends in Indonesia. So I did learn that very recently. Prior to that, I'm sure the Amazing Race has been to Jakarta.
Oh, for sure.
But I don't remember specifically what I learned on those experiences. So not a whole lot, which was exciting to me. And as we just discussed before we started filming, in my horrible world geography, I often can confuse the Philippines and Indonesia in terms of what happened there. Vaguely was aware that tsunamis impacted Indonesia, had no idea they had so many volcanoes. So didn't know a lot. Have a lot to learn. Let's jump right into some demographics before we get to some of the bigger things we wanted to talk about. The population of Indonesia is 273.5 million humans. The biggest cities, the capital city is Jakarta, and then Bali is another big one. Languages are really interesting in Indonesia, which is something that I learned. The official language is Indonesian. which is more related to Malay language and its neighbor Malaysia, which thanks to our friends at Geography Now for pointing out the interesting relationship between Malaysia and Indonesia. There are 700 regional languages, though, in Indonesia. It has 10% of the world's languages and is the second most linguistically diverse nation after Papua New Guinea, which shares the island of Papua with Indonesia. So really, really linguistically diverse area of the world, which is cool. Their currency is the Indonesian rupiah, which you have to have a lot of to reach a US dollar, folks. 14,525 of them to be specific. The system of government, they have a democracy as of 1999. They're a relatively young country in the world, having been established and getting their freedom from the Dutch in 1949. There is Sharia law enforced in a section of Sumatra, and Dr. Kristen, being the religious expert that she is, will get more into the Muslimness of Indonesia. Obviously, it's located in Southeast Asia and Oceania. The Melanesia region is only the island of Papua, but that technically falls into Oceania, so it's mostly Southeast Asia between the Indian and Pacific Oceans, and consists of more than 17,000 islands.
Yikes.
Is a lot. It's interesting that there's like a politicization of how many islands are listed. And so sometimes like some government officials list them at 15,000. And according to the Indonesian government, 17,000 plus. And over 900 of them are inhabited. So lots of uninhabited space. Demographics, 55% of the population live in urban areas. It's a relatively young population. As of 2019, the median age was 30, and 42% of the population fall between 25 and 54 years of age. The demographics on women are pretty much the same as in a lot of Southeast Asian countries. Women in a lot of rural Native communities in these different ethnic groups can have a lot of power in positions like midwifery, healer, ritualist, and shaman. Women's emancipation movement started in the 19th century. And fun fact, Indonesian women have always had suffrage, because the first election in 1955, women had equal voting rights. So they had no suffrage movement specifically for voting. There are 1,340 recognized ethnic groups, which makes it part of this linguistic, ethnically diverse land. They share things from language and common cultural characteristics with traditions, technologies like tattooing, stilt houses, jade carving, wetland agriculture, and rock art motifs. I did learn about yams in my cultural anthropology class, but I don't think I'll have anything to say about that until we get to Papua New Guinea. Dr. Kristen, would you like to cover colonization and religion for me?
Well, I mean, I don't know what a better transition to colonization than yams, but
Yams.
Here we go. So, I mean, essentially, like, it started off the same way most island nations started off. Somebody wanted their spices or their natural resources. And in this case, it was the Portuguese. And they just showed up. And then the Dutch showed up. And then the Spanish showed up, and the Dutch won. So the Dutch set up the East India Company. And pretty much from then on out, controlled a lot of Indonesia. There's some stuff that goes back and forth where, you know, there was some colonial assets. The Dutch were not the worst colonizers. If we're going to do a sliding scale here, there was ish indigenous, but not enough. And that's where we'll get into why Islam was a really, like, ended up prospering so much. So, you know, bookmark. But really, because all of colonization is economic, the Dutch just needed the crops. They weren't quite, the British system of colonization was a lot more culturally totalitarian than some of the other.
Like they needed to implement and
like they had a lot of morals attached to their colonization.
Yeah, and so did the good old US of A. Like, we had a lot of indigenous erasure and assimilation as a part of our colonization policies, as did the British. The Dutch, not so much. They just wanted the resources, not the culture.
Yeah, the British and the American Empire were a whole lot more into creating mini states as colonization instead of just economic resource outputs. And I'm happy to get into the Protestantism of it all in a separate lecture. If you want me to do that, I can record it. And when we get to some other countries, especially India, Guam, Kenya, Malawi, I'll have some thoughts.
Come back at the end of the month when we talk about the US colony of Guam.
So, buttons. In regards to Indonesia's colonization, it like Japan showed up for a little while because this was the part of the world in which during World War II, Japan showed up everywhere.
Yeah, Japan like colonized all of Southeast Asia.
You know, Japan got a Japan. And there was some messiness, of course, during colonization and the fight for independence. There's a lot of phases of it, but like Aaron said, by the time we hit 1949, they are an independent nation. Now, the democracy happened. There was somebody in the middle of that many people consider to be a dictator. And this is important because one of the ways that organized religion, specifically conservative ends of organized religion, can thrive anywhere in the world is in spaces of economic and political instability. So when people feel they have no hope, no way to get a job, no anything, they'll turn to a lot of different options. And one of those things frequently is belief in a higher power. Mm. And when you can't control your own existence, it's very easy to then implant your beliefs about the planet, your fear, your overwhelmed nature, what have you, onto said higher power. And in Indonesia, this happened within the system of Islam, because as Islam came in slowly, there wasn't like a mass colonization effort. It came in through trade routes, the way that Christianity was spread too. It came in through trade routes. But the thing with Islam is that it's a really big believer in like indigenous leadership. Part of the theology of Islam is that you have to know the language of the Quran, and you have to, like, there's a lot of stuff that empowers the people in a way that, just editorial note, Christianity can frequently didn't historically. Again, editorial comment. But so it was often the better option than being Dutch. It allowed more autonomy to like more definition of what it meant to be Indonesian instead of to be Dutch. And you could lean into that. Crass generalization. But Islam is an incredibly generous religion. It takes care of the poor very well. It makes sense that a nation that is full of these disparate islands, and every island has its own economic structure in a certain way, a religion that entirely focuses on charity and piety would make a lot of sense.
And community, right? Like Islam is so much about building and maintaining community. And we learned that the motto for Indonesia is unity through diversity, because there's so many ethnic groups and religious groups or linguistic groups and islands. So, you know, it does make sense that a lot of the attractiveness of Islam was attractive as a large scale religious movement on the islands.
For sure. So then everybody existed peacefully-ish, but like large scale wise, religion wasn't a point of persecution for a good chunk of Indonesia's independent history. The dictator wasn't as much into killing Christians, for instance, as he was into just making sure that everybody made exactly what he wanted them to make. Fast forward to 2004. There was a massive, massive tsunami that decimated most of Sumatra. If you are a Western person and watching this, there is a fabulous movie that is emotionally gut-wrenching with Ewan McGregor, Naomi Watts, and Tom Holland.
Spider-Man.
That is my personal favorite, Peter Parker, that goes into a family who was on vacation in Jakarta when this happened, and kind of what it felt like.
I remember.
In a remote northern part of Sumatra called Aceh, I think I'm getting that pronunciation right. The predominant belief became that the tsunami happened because Allah was not pleased with their level of faithfulness. Again, after natural disasters or wars, this is very common. We've done this in Christianity. It happens in Judaism. It happens constantly. So this is just something that people do, especially when they do not have access to natural resources the way that these people in Sumatra did not have. So this has led to an area of Sumatra that is run by Sharia law and increasingly spreading and getting increasing power, where there is increased persecution of Christians in particular. We do have more reports of churches being made illegal, Christians being killed, active persecution against people who are not the right kind of Muslim either. So it's not just Christians, it's not just Westerners, it is also if you are not the right kind of Muslim.
Yeah.
That is currently just on Sumatra. However, a lot of Indonesian religious experts and Indonesian human rights people are saying there needs to be infrastructure shifts within the country. And I'm sure that COVID just screwed this 19 ways to Sunday to prevent Sharia from spreading. Because again, as we have said in every video on this channel that has talked about terrorism, the only way to stop extremist movements of any kind, of which Sharia law is considered by most Muslims to be an extremist movement, is to provide food, clothing, housing, education, to provide infrastructure. And that's it. That's the way you fight it. That's it. And so a lot of Indonesian voices that I've been reading in the last couple of weeks as we've been researching this are calling for international aid in the form of infrastructure and pressure upon the Indonesian government to reformulate how resources are distributed among the islands, to be able to counter the Sharia law with examples of democracy functioning properly. So that is a really, really messy, we don't usually go into as much religion in the 101 videos as we did here, but I think it's really important to understand specifically how it kind of functions and how it got there. Again, it's trade routes, and Christianity spread through our immune systems, by the way. It's like immune systems and trade routes. So like Christians were really used to caring for the sick. And so when plagues came, we already had decent immune systems.
Yeah.
So the ones that didn't die.
Yeah, but I think it's really important.
So it's always that kind of practical stuff.
Yeah, I think it's really important to spend that time, though, understanding specifically why it's the largest Muslim nation in the world, because a lot of people would assume it was one of the Middle Eastern places, and why it's unique to the islands that make up Indonesia, both in the geography of Indonesia and its physical location on the planet, all play a part in why this has happened. And so, I think it's important in a way that's different from just naming the religious breakdown of Iran, as we did in previous videos.
For just really briefly, one of the outshoots of that, an increasing kind of conservative bent within the largest religious system, means that while LGBT activity might be legal, or women's rights might be legal, the kind of more insidious stuff still happens. There's more and more conservative movements within groups, not just in Sumatra, but to curtail more, especially same-sex unions and not just behavior.
Same-sex couples are not eligible for any legal protections of opposite-sex couples, and there's no protection against discrimination, does not recognize same-sex marriage, civil partnerships, or domestic partnerships. Same-sex couples cannot adopt. Transgender identity is a long tradition in Indonesian cultures and societies, and generally more acceptable than the LGB folks. But certainly I think we'll see shifting changes in that if we do not stem the tide of the Sharia movement off of Sumatra.
Sex trafficking is a major part of the economy of Jakarta. It just is. Human trafficking is a major part of the economy of Jakarta. And Indonesia is one of the spots in the Asian sex tourism market that isn't quite talked about as much as some other pockets, but it definitely is thriving there. So, however, we don't want to end on the negative notes. There are beautiful things about Indonesia, and we both learned quite a few of them. Dr. Erin, what did you learn that you would like to share with our folks?
Two things specifically. One, They have a amusement park. I don't know what we would call it.
A tourism destination?
A tourist attraction spot in Jakarta. That's basically a mini Indonesia. And if you go, there's like mini buildings and you can experience all the different cultures, probably not all, but a lot of the different cultural distinctions in Indonesia without traveling to all the islands. And we went to a place in Brussels when we went to Belgium many moons ago, called Mini Europe. And it was just literally a tourist attraction of mini models from all the European nations. And
it's hilarious.
Their mascot was a giant orange turtle.
Yep.
That we got our picture taken with, obviously. But if you're ever in Brussels, that's a great way to see parts of Europe you might not get to. And we have it from some tourist folks that if you can't make it to all of Indonesia, make sure you check out Mini Indonesia, and you can get a sense for the ethnic and cultural diversity that exists. The other thing that I learned, I'm not a big fan of puppet shows, but I really liked the fact that several of the Indonesian subcultures, like Javanese and a few others, have a traditionally ethnic shadow puppet theater tradition. I don't know what that looks like. I would like to find out more about it. And it just made me smile, just hearing that information from our friends at Geography Now. So those were the two things that I took away that I was deeply pleased about. How about yourself?
I love that they cobbled together their own language so that no language would have primacy.
Yeah, that was massive. Yeah.
I really, really liked that. I'm a huge proponent of that word shape how we see the world. And so to declare that they would do the work to create a new language was really
because they could use the Javanese dialect. Like Javanese people make up, I think, over 40% of the Indonesian population.
They could have used English. They could have used English like India does.
They could have, yeah. Or they could have like taken from one of the biggest populations. But they didn't, because for that specific reason, which, yeah, I agree with you. That was really cool.
It was really rad. So tomorrow we're going to experience pretty much the Indonesian movie that we could find streaming anywhere. And it is about their president, Habibie, and his wife.
Ainun.
Join us then.
Yeah, gird your loins. We'll see you next.